This is Neptune Talks, a podcast series by Water Science Policy, a multilingual, open-access platform which provides water-related journalism to a global audience. Water affects all things on our planet. Solving the water puzzle could help address biodiversity loss, climate change impacts, food production, and urbanization around the world. And of course, the most challenging goal is to reach billions of people that remain without access to affordable clean water and sanitation. At Water Science Policy, we speak to those change makers and about their search for solutions. Like the Roman god of water and sea, Neptune, they went deep instead of living on the surface. We tell stories about water that inspire and perhaps change a perception of our most precious resource. Let's Neptune in. Today, I have the honor of speaking to Gary White. He is the co-founder of two organizations, waterorg and WaterEquity. Both organizations support people living in poverty to get access to safe water and sanitation through affordable small loans called water credits. Hi Gary. I'm your host, Silvia, and I am the co-founder of Water Science Policy, which is a digital and multilingual platform that shares stories about water to a global audience. I am here today to chat about your book, The Worth of Water. Let's start with some data. Today, millions of people lack access to safe water at home, and billions don't have a toilet. I have read that you have an engineering background, yet your solution is quite different from drilling wells. It's about providing small loans. Could you please explain how and why you transitioned from your engineering background to a more finance-related domain?
Yeah, I think the short answer is because just focusing on the engineering wasn't going to allow us to solve this massive problem. Sustainable Development Goal number 6 is water and sanitation, safely managed water and sanitation for all. And, I recognized that the dominant model of raising philanthropic capital, donations and going and kind of drilling wells for communities around the world had its natural limits. And at the same time, when I was, in more traditional work in these low-income countries, I had the opportunity to meet a lot of people who live in poverty. And, if we think about it, they are facing their water crisis every day. And today, everyone in the world, when they woke up, had to get water somewhere. And what I was discovering is how much they were paying to get that water, paying in terms of their time that they could have spent at a paying job, paying in terms of their time instead of being in school if you're, a young girl, paying in terms of their health, paying in terms of cash in many urban slums where you don't have any other option but to buy water from these water vendors who aren't necessarily selling high quality water and are selling it usually at 10 to 15 times what it cost if you had piped water. And so it was like this realization that, wait, maybe this problem contains its own solution. If you could take all of those coping costs that people were incurring and kind of redirect that money, then maybe this could work. And that's where we zoomed in on microfinance. Like, let's get these people small loans so that they can pay a connection fee to the utility, which might be, $300 or so. And then they can escape this kind of spiral of poverty where they're paying $1 or $2 every day for water, and they can be getting water at a much more affordable rate. And then they have enough savings in their day-to-day, water needs that they can pay back the loan. And what we found is now that more than 43 million people have chosen this option with our financial partners around the world. And we've mobilized about $3.5 billion in capital from the capital markets to break that down into these small loans so that people can solve their own water crisis. So we see, engineering is always going to be necessary in terms of the infrastructure and getting the pipes in the ground, et cetera. But for most people, it's not a technology or an engineering issue. It's simply a finance issue.
Well, that leads to my second question, which is really much related to what you were talking about. And to me, reading your book, it really seems that you've got an epiphany along the journey, that it's expensive to be poor, and that people living in poverty spend as much as 20% of their income on water, which is a lot compared to what middle class spend on average. And therefore, you argue also that the water crisis is a market failure, and so it's a financial problem. As you said, of course, we will always need to have engineers, but given the great success of your organization with the solutions and the water credits that you've developed at water.org, would you say that we would also need more financial experts and economists to solve the water crisis?
I think this problem is so big, it's all hands on deck, and we do need different types of expertise. We need entrepreneurs who are out there, starting small businesses that are designed to address the sanitation needs, in particular, of households. Emptying pit latrines, treating the sewage, collecting the sewage. Because a lot of these communities are not going to have piped sewage for a while. People who are purifying water and selling it at affordable rates, that's an issue. People who are selling water filters, right? And all of these things are things that people can take out one of these small water credit loans for. So I do think we need to look at finance much more. This is roughly speaking $1 trillion problem. And if you look at the government resources that are going into this, it's not really scratching the surface hardly. So we do need to look at blended finance, where we can bring in the private sector, where we can bring in some of the global development finance institutions that can come in with capital in a way that can be paired with government capital, for instance, in public-private partnerships, so that these things can move forward. And at water.org, what we've done is actually create, and I might be jumping ahead a little bit here, Silvia, is create a asset manager now, WaterEquity. And WaterEquity raises debt and investment capital in the US and Europe, and then we use that to invest in our downstream financial partners and increasingly into infrastructure providers, so that they have the capital they need in order to expand the network to some of the poorer neighborhoods. And I think that's what we need in terms of finance and financial experts, are people who make sure when the finance flows that it serves those populations that have the greatest need, in addition to the businesses in the middle class neighborhoods. And that's key to this as well, because that's where those 771 million people who lack water access are in those marginal neighborhoods, and they're traditionally not served well.
Well, that's great, and again, it leads to my next question, which is really a curiosity, because in your book you argue that if a single person or a family living in poverty could get a small fair loan from microfinance institutions, then they could use it for more permanent solutions, like for instance getting a toilet installed in their home, and still they would be able to pay back the loan. So to me, maybe because I'm not a finance expert, this is not necessarily obvious. If poor people cannot afford to pay for water or basic sanitation, how could they possibly manage to pay back a loan? So shouldn't water be free for them or subsidized by the government?
I do believe that for certain populations that are so poor, there should be a cross-subsidy that virtually allows them to get the first amount of water that they need each month for free. I do believe there should be subsidies in the system. But I also believe that we need to segment the market. And there's literally hundreds of millions of people who only need access to affordable finance so that they can deliver the solution that's best for their family. And that's really where we see this being so important, because this problem is so big, it's not going to be solved just by government investment alone. There has to be kind of bottom-up financing that enables people living in poverty to pay those connection fees so they can pay an affordable water tariff. And I think that is key to the sustainability of infrastructure. If we don't have people paying a water tariff, then the systems kind of go into disrepair. And we already see, in some countries where there are 50% water losses in the system. That's partly due to mismanagement, but it's also partly due to underfunding those systems to maintain the infrastructure. And when you look at those losses, that's a huge carbon footprint. I think we all know how much energy is associated with sourcing water from where it is to where it needs to be, to treating it, to distributing it. And when you have 50% of that carbon footprint that's lost and provides no economic value whatsoever, that's a huge miss. And so I think we have to be looking at this from an equity perspective. We have to look at it from a climate perspective, and we also have to look at it from a financial sustainability perspective. And so that's, getting back to your question about how can somebody like this afford it, I would just offer you this one story of a woman I met in the Philippines, and we talk about this in the book. Her name is Lina Riza, and she was paying $2 a day to a water vendor for water for her home, $60 a month. And all she needed was a loan. It was about $300 so that she could get connected to the utility and pay for the plumbing to get to her house. And now she's paying a $5 water tariff. And when she was paying off her loan over about 2 years, she is paying about another $5 a month for that. So you can see a $50 savings in her situation, where she, we talk about how expensive it is to be poor. It was very expensive for her to pay $2 a day because that's all she could do. She was too poor to get that loan until one of our partners did that. And now she has that extra $50 that she can put towards, sending her kids to school, buying healthier food, whatever it takes. And this is why water is so fundamental, such a foundation, a springboard for a better life.
In terms of financial sustainability, and you've touched a little bit upon that already, you believe that the profit and the non-profit words could sort of meet halfway to solve the most pressing issues, such as, for instance, global access to affordable and clean water. And so the two sectors can work together. And in the book, you also talk about the grant support that water.org received from PepsiCo Foundation. My question is, how does water.org make sure that an investment from a giant like PepsiCo, for instance, is not, and pass me the term, greenwashing, or in other words, cleaning their past reputation? Are you, or were you originally skeptical about their philanthropic approach?
So whenever we partner with anyone, we want to make sure there's a good fit. And I had a lot of conversations with people at PepsiCo, and including Indra Nooyi, the CEO at the time. And I really believe they were committed to making sure that they were good water stewards and that they were putting water, being water positive was their ultimate goal. And so from our perspective, if we can work with a partner that's striving to improve their operations and have measurable impact, and they are able to provide us with the philanthropic support that we need to reach millions more people with water, then I think that's a good partnership. And I think what we've been able to do is literally to reach, more than, I'm trying to think with the PepsiCo funding alone, it was over 3 million people that we reached with access to water or sanitation. And that, to me, trying to raise that philanthropic capital, as you can imagine, is extremely hard. There's always much more demand for that than there is supply. And so we've been very fortunate to partner with them, with Anheuser-Busch InBev, with Caterpillar, with Inditex, lots of companies who I believe are striving towards and becoming much better water stewards.
It is very impressive, and especially the amount that you were able to raise. What also struck me is the reach in terms of millions of people across the globe. You mentioned before 43 million people. At what point did you really think, wow, we made it? And what is the recipe for your success, if there is a recipe for it, or at least give us some ingredients?
Well, I certainly don't feel like we've made it. I do feel like we have developed a hypothesis and then proved that, in that people living in poverty are actually a very good bet in terms of giving them access to these small loans for water and sanitation. These loans repay back at about 99%. And so for me, that was a big moment to recognize that we could use that philanthropy and turn it into, capital, from the capital markets. And so that is important, but it's, it was a hypothesis. And then we have the evidence, of $3.5 billion in these loans having taken place and that 99% repayment rate. That's a big deal, but it also indicates that we still have a lot of work to do to reach, the more than 1 billion people who lack water and sanitation. And how can we continue to use philanthropy in a smart way to correct what are really market failures, at the base of the pyramid, and then really complete what I call the financial plumbing between the global capital markets and women living on a few dollars a day. There's still a lot of work to be done. This is working in some markets. We haven't been able to expand it everywhere yet, but that is, the ultimate, time when we can really celebrate when we meet SDG number 6, and everybody, either through a subsidy that's needed for some, or whether it be through a small loan, or whether it be through their own growth in income, that they're able to pay a sustainable water tariff that allows the infrastructure to be built and maintained so that we can have water in perpetuity, like so many of us already enjoy in so many countries, at a fraction of the percentage of our income that someone in another country pays.
You just talked about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and as you know, 23 marks the halfway point of the UN decade for water action, which runs until 2028. Where do you think we are at the moment, and what do you think is going to come next for water.org to achieve that target?
Well, I think we're behind, and I don't think anyone would argue that we're not. I think what we need to do, and I think this is, being recognized throughout the sector, the amount of people, number of people in the sector now talking about finance compared to, 15 years ago, or even 10 years ago, or 5 years ago. The discussion is much more with finance in the center as opposed to, engineering or, other aspects of the problem. Also, that's central to this right now is climate. And so when you hear so many people talking about, if climate change is a shark, then water are the teeth, right? This is how it's being lived out right now by people. Climate change for people living in the greatest poverty, it's all about water and not having enough of it, or having too much of it, or having it contaminated by saltwater intrusion and other things. So when you look at the focus on finance, you look at the focus on climate, if you can put these two together, because there's a lot of investment capital out there for climate right now. And as we look at resilience and adaptation for some of the poorest populations on the planet, as well as I talked earlier about the mitigation potential of improving the infrastructure, what we're doing next with WaterEquity, our asset manager, is focusing on infrastructure that will allow us to raise that capital, particularly maybe from some of the green investors who are concerned about climate, and then put that capital to work so that people get access to better infrastructure at affordable rates that will be more climate resilient. So that's why I'm optimistic, is because finance is at the center of the conversation. The capital is out there right now for climate change. And I should also note that, we've never seen such a concentration of wealth among the world's billionaires, who are increasingly becoming philanthropists. And so that philanthropic capital that we need to kind of set all this into motion and to correct those market failures, that money's out there. It's not flowing yet. But if you look at people like Jack Dorsey and Mackenzie Scott, who are literally pouring billions of dollars of unrestricted philanthropy into things like the SDGs, I'm very optimistic.
That's great. And also that you mentioned climate and how adaptation relates to water and water relates to adaptation and mitigation measures that could be taken. And in fact, at Water Science Policy, we tell stories about water and we try to bring awareness on innovative solution like yours that can solve these incredibly complex water problems. Yet we also struggle, like everybody else in the sector, to make science communication scalable and accessible to all and for free and in so many different languages. So what, from your perspective and experience, should an NGO like ours learn from your journey, although we're doing quite different sort of things, but similar in a way to try and solve the issue?
Yeah, no, you bring up a great question because it's not just about what you're doing, but how you communicate it. And I think that is a challenge for us kind of as scientists and engineers. I don't know if we can extrapolate to the Water Science Policy Organization, but what I did is I went out and found a great storyteller, or maybe he found me, and that's Matt Damon, right? So that is clearly Matt makes his living as a storyteller. And I've been very fortunate to partner with him on the book as we worked on that together, and in terms of a lot of media interviews that we do. And Matt is able to really tell the story in a very, very relatable way. So I think you don't need a Hollywood actor to do that, but you do need to be intentional about it. And I'm sure you guys think about it all the time. Just how do you present data graphically in ways that people can immediately grasp and understand and translate, the science into the human impact? And certainly that's something that we try to do all the time, because no matter how you come about solving this problem, whether it is, a direct solution like drilling a well, or whether it is through a microfinance institution, or whether it's through a small loan, at the end of the day, the real impact is that woman turning on the tap in her house. And no matter how that got done, that's the story, right? And so you want to be able to tell the story of how your organization translates that into that human impact in a very tangible way, in a very personal way. And that's one of the reasons why we wrote the book, because we felt like that was one more way that we could reach people's minds and hearts with this challenge, and importantly, what they can do about it.
Thank you. And that actually really leads naturally to my last question. Talking about Hollywood and people and quite famous guys, this podcast is called Neptune. And as you know, Neptune is the Roman god of water and sea. Mm-hmm. If you, like Neptune, were governing the sea, but had the power to do only one thing to end the water crisis, what would that be?
Oh, Neptune. Yeah, I think what I would do is I would convene the philanthropist, and I would convene like the people who manage assets together in one room and say, look, we need both of you together. We need you philanthropists to see how this can be a solution to one of the world's greatest challenges. And we need you at the table, but you're not going to have to lift it all by yourself. We've got all of these investors here as well. And together, using that philanthropy, it will take a fraction of the philanthropy to solve this problem if we can engage those people on the other side of the table, those capital providers, so that everyone meets their objectives. That, I believe, is what would solve this crisis, because everybody can win in that scenario. The philanthropists get that social impact. People living in poverty get so much value created for them, like Lenoriza in the Philippines, that you can slice off part of that value and pass it up to the investors. But you need, if this is all the machinery that needs to happen, you need that philanthropy to kind of grease the wheels of this so that it can work for everybody. So I would put all those people in a room, and we wouldn't leave until we figured out how to put all the pieces together. I'd have Neptune there with his trident at their throats.
Thank you. I think you would probably be a good Neptune then. With this one, we conclude the interview, and I really appreciate the time you took to talk to me today, and really good luck with the water journey you have had.
Thank you, Silvia. I really appreciate the opportunity, and happy to do it anytime.
Thank you so much. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to read or listen to more of our content, check out our website at watersciencepolicy.com. We usually publish new policy briefs, op-eds, photo stories, and insights on all things water-related in several languages other than English. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Any donation is also greatly appreciated, no matter how big or small. For now, thank you again for tuning in, and see you next time.